Hello everyone, this is Team Last Call, Coach Garver's class, Marketing 450 here. What we're going to be doing today in this podcast is we're going to be preparing a qualitative analysis on the main concepts between Coach Garver's Teachers Podcast. We're going to be trying to find some similarities between them and trying to show how teachers try to create a strong learning environment for their students. First off, we want to start off explaining the main concept, what we found. We thought culture was probably the biggest concept through all the teacher podcasts. This drives and influences every other concept that we're going to be discussing in this podcast. So with that being said, let's get started and move into these concepts here. First off, we're going to start with the business environment that we found that a lot of teachers try to create in their classes. For example, quick example, Ken Cherry, he mentioned one of the first things he does in his classes is first day of class, before even saying hi, he says, all right, stand up and ask us any of his students stupid. Seems like a blunt question, that's what he does. He says, if you're stupid, sit down. Obviously no one sits down, and he says, okay, so you're smart. He goes, are you guys 18 years old? If you're not, sit down. And no one sits down, so you go, all right, so you're smart and you're adults. And then he goes, are you guys, if you're not responsible for your actions, sit down. Everyone remains standing. And then he goes, all right, so you're smart, you're adults, and you're accountable. And the reason he does this is just kind of emulate the business environment that people are going to see in the real life. You're held accountable for your actions, and you're going to be treated as adults in his classroom. Emphasize preparation, being ready for class. And a lot of the ways teachers explain this is through, kind of ties into accountability, holding students responsible for the reading material. A lot of teachers expect the students to read the material before the night and then come into class and apply that material. So they want the students to learn the material outside of the classroom, before the classroom, and then come in knowing the material and getting ready to apply it, just so they can understand it even better. It gets a deeper sense of learning. The third one is recognition of performance. This is something that happens in the business world a lot. You do something good, your boss is going to notice it, and he's going to acknowledge you for it. And at the same time, if you do something bad, same thing. It might be a little bit worse. Your boss is he's gonna get on you if you do something bad. One way Zach Williams performed a great example of this. He said, after a class discussion, when he's driving home, he'll reflect on the class discussion, what went well, what went right, and if a student really popped out at him, he mentioned how he would go home and shoot that student an email saying, hey, great job in class today, keep up the good work, just kind of motivating that student to keep up what he was doing. Example of the negative feedback is Mark Franek mentioned how about a third through the class, through daily quizzes, if he notices a student is struggling, he'll pull him in his office and basically just ask him what they can do to help him, what he can do to help him, how can we change your habits, and how can we get you on track to getting a better grade. So those are two examples of how acknowledgement of performance, good and bad, happen in these classrooms throughout these teachers to try and help stimulate learning and encourage students. The next concept we have is the real world. Professors try to simulate a real world environment in their learning exercises, and a lot of the way they do this is real world examples. A lot of they bring in case studies, they bring in real world articles to show students not only just so you're not learning out of a textbook, you want to be learning how this stuff is actually applied in real life, and it kind of helps students grasp the concept a little bit better and show them how it actually affects businesses in the real world. And the next way they do that is through the teacher's own experience. A lot of these teachers, they actually had jobs in the field. They actually did this job, and a lot of the teachers show that experience and share that experience with the students to help them, as also just grasp the concept. And that also helps showing students that experience helps with their credibility, which helps build trust. If a student sees that a teacher is experienced in the field, you're going to be more prone to trust his information. He's been there, he's done that. Real world examples, just to give you a quick understanding of what I'm talking about. One of the teachers, Mark Franek, he had a really neat example in one of his classrooms. He teaches geography, and what one of the projects or examples he does with the students, he'll bring in a cotton ball, and each student will have to guess how many drops they think the cotton ball will be able to hold. And he mentions that hardly ever any student comes close. They usually underestimate it by far. And the reason he does this is to show the difference between precipitation and condensation. So that's just kind of an example of how a geography teacher is using a real-world example with real-world tools in his classroom to show the difference. So you're not just reading the definition of the two in a textbook. You're seeing it happen. You're actually witnessing it happen in the classroom. And not only does that help them grasp the concept a little bit better, but it keeps them interested. You're not just going to class. You're not just reading a chapter. You're actually going to be doing something. You're actually going to be applying it. And all of this, and that helps create, like I said, it helps create a spark of interest. It gets students involved, and that all leads into a safe environment. It all helps build a safe environment for students. A fun, enjoyable time to go to class. And when you have a safe environment, students, they feel safe to talk. They feel more prone to open up. They're not scared to raise their hand. They're more willing to take risks. And, they're not scared to be wrong because it's a learning environment. You're not going to be right all the time. Example of this, a safe to talk environment, Zach Williams talks specifically in his podcast with Coach Garver about how it's really important for him to create that safe environment, just to help stimulate that peer-to-peer feedback, to help stimulate those relationships between students, make them feel more comfortable, and that helps them open up eventually. And that just creates a better learning environment. And when you do that, it creates this judgment-free zone. And that judgment-free zone, a result of that, you're going to have a connection, not only between your students, but between the students and the teacher. And we think a great example of this connection is in our class, Marketing 450 with Coach Garver. It's all in the name right there. We call him Coach. That just shows a relationship that's very rare with a teacher. And, having that, it just, like I said, it just stimulates a learning environment that you can't emulate through a lecture. And it opens up creativity. It helps students think beyond the box and the boundaries that usually they're bound to. All right, so the last three concepts that I've talked about, the business world, the real world, and the safe environment, they all begin with the structure, which is laid out really on the first day of class, where the teacher lay out their expectations and what they want the students to do. And they do that through various ways of providing a rubric for them, showing them how the class is going to be presented, and offering them guidelines and kind of not paving a path for them, but showing them the direction that the class is going to be headed in. And, one of the ways they do this is teachers the teachers in these podcasts explain that they're very thorough in explaining the layout of their exams, the quizzes, and the projects, and how they'll be conducted, and expectations on those assignments, and kind of questions they'll be asked. A lot of teachers, they don't give multiple choice questions on all their exams. You're going to have open-ended questions. You're going to need to pull knowledge out of your head and articulate it on paper. Which is a very, if you can do that, that shows that you've really grasped the material, and that's what teachers are looking for. And another way teachers do this is a lot of these teachers have a building environment in their classroom. And what I mean by building environment is in the early stages of the class, early stage of the semester, the points for the assignments are worth substantially less than what they would be towards the middle or the end of the semester. And the reasons they do this is because, early on in the semester, students are going to make mistakes. They're not going to do as well, but they're going to learn from those mistakes. And as they learn, they'll get better. And then as the semester goes on, those projects will be worth more points now. And that's where they can capitalize on those opportunities and really help raise their grade and show that they've improved. Ken Cherry is a great example of that. He specifically talked about that in his podcast, how he has that building environment. And then one of the reason teachers do lay their classes out like this in this structure is so they can find patterns in the students' habits and the students' weaknesses and strengths. And then once a teacher finds those patterns, they can capitalize on those and say, majority of the class is weak in this point. Let's spend some time on this and let's learn this a little bit better. So pattern is a really big reason why the teachers have this structure in their class, why they have the guidelines, the rubrics, the expectations, so they can kind of see where students are doing good, where students are doing bad, and then, like I said, they can go in there and then they can capitalize on those opportunities and really help them learn more. And this all ties into the professor's role. Like I said earlier, it's not Mr. Garver, it's not Dr. Garver, it's Coach Garver. That's his role to us. He's a coach. Ken Cherry sees himself as a mediator. So the professor's role is a really big part in the environment of the classroom and the structure of it and how students perceive the classroom. And it creates an enjoyable environment as well, which, I think it's safe to say everyone learns better in an enjoyable environment. Well, in creating the structure in your classroom, what you're going to do is you're essentially going to stimulate active learning, which is going to be our next main concept that we're going to discuss here. One of the concepts in active learning that a lot of teachers touched on in these podcasts is group work. It was actually a really big point and really important to a lot of the classrooms. What group work does, it essentially allows students to get in groups and work with each other and just get perspectives from all different students. You're not only learning from your professor now, but you're learning from each other, and it just opens them up to a whole different variety of opinions and just really expands their boundaries on their thinking and how other people think. And not only does it help their learning in that classroom, but it develops essential life skills that you're going to need in the real world. You're going to need to learn how to work with others and work with groups and communicate with others and be friendly with others and work with people that might be difficult at times. So it was a really big point in a lot of the teachers' classrooms. And next, another big point that they brought up was application. Applying real-world scenarios in the classroom. Through case studies, through actual articles of the business world, just to kind of relate back to the real world that we talked about earlier. Just showing students the perspective of how what they're learning is actually used. It's kind of an eye-opener to say, I'm not just reading a textbook. I'm actually learning something that's done every day. It's hands-on, it's in-class application, and it stimulates the student's interest, and that's really important when it comes to active learning. You want interest, you want motivation, you want their attention, and that's three great ways to get it, and that's three of the things that a lot of the teachers mentioned. The next thing that was a big topic and was debate. Ken Cherry touched on this specifically. And told how he lets students, constructively debate in class. If they have conflicting opinions, they talk about it. And, that back when I talked about structure, Ken Cherry looks at himself as a mediator, and this is how he does it. He, like I said, he lets students talk about their opinions in a constructive manner, an appropriate manner, and see, why do you think you're right? Why do you think you're wrong? And talk it out and, eventually come to a resolution. And like I said, it just helps students see other people's opinions, see why other students think that. And it's just a great life lesson, and it's a great way to learn. Next, Gary Gagne specifically talks about what he calls struggle, which is very interesting, actually. He talks about this Vegas trip that he puts together. And what he does is he actually makes the students really do all the work when it comes to planning the Vegas trip, the whole logistics, the hotel, from the very beginning of getting in contact with the people out there. He really doesn't help the students at all, except for getting them in the program. And he even mentions he could easily do it. He could easily, make a phone call and say, hey, I got a couple students coming out. Can you set this up? He could do that easily, but he doesn't. It all relates back to this concept of struggle. He wants the students to get those communication skills, to get those skills of booking a trip and getting the logistics down, and it's all about responsibility, essentially, when you think about it. Just being organized and communicating with the right people, and just having your act together, really. Concepts that we really brought up throughout all the podcasts. Just do a quick overview. We talked about emulating the business world, using real world examples, providing a safe environment, having that structure to your class, and then stimulating that active learning. And what all of these concepts are building up to do, what's the purpose of all of these concepts, if you would say the core phenomena, what it is to build that culture. You want to create that culture, whether you want to call it a learning culture, a friendly culture, a positive culture. And when you get that positive culture, the most important outcome of that we found, and that a lot of the teachers touched on, is you're going to get the feedback. You're going to get the positive feedback that students need and that students want. And when you have that feedback, what you're going to get, you're going to have the peer-to-peer. You're going to have relationships in the classroom. Students are going to, even beyond relationships, you're going to develop friendships, which is going to help the learning experience tremendously for students. You're going to have professor-student relationships. Not only are they going to get feedback from their peers, but most importantly, they're going to get feedback from their professor. And hopefully it'll increase the timeliness, which is a huge factor. It was touched on, and I think about every single podcast, is the timeliness of the feedback. It is crucial. All these professors want their feedback to get to their students as soon as possible, when it's fresh in their mind. Right when they do an assignment, they want to let them know how they did, what they can do better, what they should do next time to be even better. So timeliness is a huge point, as well as targeted feedback or specified feedback. What do you want feedback on? And then on top of that, to build on that specified feedback, they want depth. So you want a specific topic of what you want that feedback on, and then you want depth of that topic. You need just thorough feedback, step by step, how you can get better in each different way. And another thing that this is all built up upon is self-evaluation. If you have this culture, it's going to help a student be critical on himself. Think for themselves, which is huge. If you can be critical on yourself, if you can look back, if you can step back from your work and say, I could do better here, or I could improve here, that's huge. It'll stimulate your learning so much more, and it'll create so much more opportunities for yourself in the world. All right, so when you have this good culture and you get that great feedback that helps students learn in a way that's unexplainable, even in a perfect world, not everything can go perfect, and you're going to have barriers, specifically barriers to those feedback. And we're going to touch on a couple of the main points that these professors mentioned that prohibits them from giving as much feedback as they would like to, because we all know that they would like to give more. To begin, earlier I talked about how crucial time is, and it is. Time is a huge factor when it comes to feedback, but it's also a big barrier. We all know that our professors, their job isn't only to teach. They have research to do. They have, they're swamped with work. So sometimes providing feedback instantaneously is out of the question for them, as much as they'd like to. So that's a huge barrier for them, and it's something that they're constantly trying to overcome, and students would like for that, because like we said, instant feedback is it's uncomparable. It's so beneficial that. But like I said, sometimes it's just not possible to have that instantaneous. Another barrier to giving and receiving feedback is actually technology. You'd think it'd be an asset in today's world, but right now it's a barrier just because of really how new it is. A lot of teachers aren't familiar with it. It's a little much old school, or new school, I guess you could say. And they're just, I guess you could say, scared to change. And it might come down to just lack of training. They're just not knowledgeable in how to use it effectively, at least, and it can really inhibit the feedback process, especially if they do use it and they don't use it properly. That could be even worse sometimes, and the students might not be, you might misinterpret the feedback, so either lack of using the technology or using the technology inappropriately is I think a big barrier, and is brought up in a lot of the podcasts, because I think Goffman touched on it specifically. And then another barrier would be incentives. Teachers, they really don't get anything out of giving feedback, except for the good heart of having their students do better. But they don't. It's like we said earlier, teachers are crammed for time. They're busy beyond all belief. So there's really no incentive for them to take extra time out of their day to help their 100, 200 some students and give feedback on every single one of them. And to tie into incentives, I know they talked about it specifically in Mark Franit's podcast. I thought it was actually a really interesting point. You guys were talking, Coach Garver and Mark were talking about tenure and how a lot of teachers, if you have high average grades, you're looked at as easy. You're not looked at as a good teacher. You're not looked at as your students are learning. You're looked at as being easy, and that's kind of a negative look on your part. So, I mean, if a teacher does give a lot of good feedback, his grades are going to probably be higher. So, it all kind of ties into that incentive aspect. Like the teachers just there's not a lot of motivation there to give their students feedback other than just the goodwill of doing it. Next, I like to talk. Another point of a barrier would be restrictions. The new, we talked about, the grades, but new faculty right now. They're new kids on the block. They're going to do what they're told to do. The point I'm trying to get at is, teachers are told that they have to cover so much material in the beginning of the semester. You have to cover 16 chapters. Or you have to cover 14 chapters, and that's a lot of material in one semester. And if you're a new teacher, you're gonna follow the rules. You're gonna do what you're told, and you're gonna cover those 16 chapters. It's not gonna matter if you're going too fast for the students. It's not gonna matter if the students don't get it. You're just worried about covering the material that your boss told you to cover. And so that's kind of a restriction in a way that, like I said, if you're going too fast for the students and you're a new teacher, you're not going to slow down to go back and give them feedback on what they did wrong or help them improve on where they might have, slacked off or not slacked off, but didn't perform as well as they could have. And whereas a teacher that's been here for quite some time, such as a couple of our professors, they don't have a problem with cutting out some material and spending some more time on some material that they see students are struggling with, or maybe cutting out some material and spending more time on feedback. So those are big roles in the restrictions that our education system has, and kind of it definitely hinders receiving and giving feedback. And lastly, the last barrier I'd like to talk about is teachers not sharing their results. So you have a teacher that gives great feedback, and he has great grades in his class. The students are learning; they have a great experience, and that teacher doesn't share it. He doesn't share with his colleagues, I should say. He doesn't spread the word that hey, I'm doing this in class and it's working really well. That's not happening. So, if we had more of that, if we had more teachers spreading the word of, hey, I'm doing this and it's really helping my students, get the word across, it might become a more uniform way of teaching, which we think would be great for the future of our students here at CMU and all colleges around the world. Back to a quick recap on what we've talked about here. We talked about the business world, how teachers try to emulate a business world and use real-world examples to help put in perspective for students. We talked about how teachers want to create a safe environment for students to really open up their minds and get them to not be afraid in class. We talked about the structure of a class and how important it is to have that structure and also lay it out for students to let them know. And then we discussed active learning and the different various ways that teachers do active learning and how important it is to stimulate the learning process. And all of those concepts that I just recapped for you, they all build up to culture. And it all depends. You can either, if you do all those things correctly, you're going to have a good culture. And like I said, if you have that good culture, the outcome is going to be feedback. Whereas if you have that good feedback, you're going to have that optimal learning environment. And then you have the barriers that we just discussed, and then the outcome of all this great culture and all this active learning and all the feedback. You're going to have students that are motivated. They're going to want to do their best. You're going to have creativity at its finest, and you're going to have great learning experiences. Students are going to create friendships in their classes through all the interaction, and you're going to have, the most important outcome, in our opinion, is you're going to have business-ready students. You're going to have students that are going to graduate, and they're going to go out in the real world, and they're going to know how to conduct themselves. They're going to know how to act in the real world. They're going to know what's expected of them, and they're going to represent CMU to the finest, fire up chips. You know what I'm saying? All right, so the main point that we're trying to get at in this podcast, and that we took out of Coach Garver's Teachers podcast, is that uh, it's good culture, it's positive culture that's going to drive all your feedback. You're not going to have effective feedback if you don't have that culture. It's critical to create that in your classroom, and if you do create that, the feedback will come natural, and it will create an amazing and learning environment for all your students. So with that being said, this is Team Last Call. Thanks for listening, and cheers.